Hello, and welcome back. This video is about creating a Diablo 2 style skill tree functionality in Unreal 5.4 blueprints. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. I'm going to start by adding some text that I forgot to add in the last video. I'm going to call this points text. This needs to be a variable. We'll set this default text to just 99. And size to content. Number of points, we're just going to throw down here. I'm going to duplicate this, call it points spent text. And you're going to throw this over on the bar here. Not that it really matters. I'm just going to set those to centered. So for the functionality, I'm going to go in the graph here. I'm just going to create a function, which is button clicked. This is going to be called by the button widget. So it's going to send along itself, which will just be button of type WBP skill tree button. All right, so with that, I'll start on the skill tree button. In here, we first have our button. I'm going to do an on-clicked event. So on pressed is when the button is pressed down. On released is when it's released. On clicked is effectively the same thing as on released. You can do, or if you set up like prints on both, using the enter key when it's focused or clicking on it, you'll get both on clicked and on released at the same time. So in this case, we're going to get our skill tree, convert it to a validated get, and then call that function we just made, sending along self. Going to then create a function called increase level. This will be called by the skill tree widget when a button is pressed and validated. And this will also return a Boolean to signify whether it was successful on this side. And by success on this side effectively means as long as the level is less than the max level, we can continue on with the logic. And that logic is simply look at our level, we'll do an increment operation. That's basically just a +1 with a set. And then we'll update the text that's on the button, which is by calling set text, sending along the new level value. And returning true. So in our skill tree, I'm going to first create an update tree function. I'm going to create a sequence. In here, we're getting our buttons. This is a map, and we want the buttons themselves, so we'll just get the values array. We want to iterate through this array. And we're just doing this to determine whether the buttons are enabled or not. So for that, we're going to create a local variable called isEnabled. We'll set that initially to success or true. Then we'll run another sequence in here. The first pin will determine whether we will be setting isEnabled to false, and the second pin will be setting the actual button from the widget. So to set isEnabled. As a reminder, this value here is just the WPP skill tree button object itself, so the button is inside that. So the first check we're doing is we take our point spent as long as that is greater than or equal to the button's min rank variable. The top row, these were set to 0, and then the first row was set to 6, and then 12 and 18, for example. Oh, so you can do it this way. So I have a branch here. Instead, what I'm going to do is just move that over. We're just setting the isEnabled based on the result, and then using that result for the branch. This branch will simply continue as long as this is valid. And then in the case where that button has prerequisite IDs, we want to check if it's not empty. And then just do a branch on that. So if it is empty, no further processing is needed here. The isEnabled will just be set to true and it'll be set to enabled. However, in the case where it does have prerequisites, we want to do a little bit of logic to check that it's valid. And for that, we're just going to create a new function. Let's call it has prereqs. This is going to take in the button. So I'll throw in this first. The output is just going to be the isSuccess Boolean. And the input will be the button itself. Should have done that in the reverse order because this was set to button. And the end result of that, of course, is just setting isEnabled. Back in our first sequence, after the buttons have all been set to enabled or disabled, we then need to update the various text bits. So we'll take points, enter points spent. We're going to be calling setText on this one. That, of course, is the int, not the controls. So we want point text and point text spent over here. So that's setText. Same over here. And then we want to set the progress bar. which is rank bar. So we'll take that, we're calling set percent. And the value we're setting is based on points spent. We're going to convert this to a float. Divide this by 24. That should give us our points. Oops. Up that down a bit. All right, if we go back to our event graph, we have our event construct here. In this case, we're going to use our canvas panel I talked about last video. We set this to a variable just so that we can call get all children, do a for each on that. So the end result of this is that we'll initialize everything and then send or call it update tree at the end. What we're doing with this is for all of our children, we're going to cast to WBP skill tree button. When that is successful, this is how we're filling our buttons map. It's not the index. I mean, it will be the index, but that's not how we set it up. We actually want our get ID from the button, well, from the widget. And then for each of these buttons, we also need to set its WBP skill tree, and that'll be self. So there is some tight coupling between the skill tree and the skill tree buttons, but the skill tree buttons are specifically made for the skill tree, so it's not necessarily the best design, but it's also, not horrible. All right, so with that, we can update our button clicked functionality. First thing we're doing here is just checking to make sure that we have enough points to spend. Didn't hit B quick enough. And if we do, we're going to be using our button here, so get button to get that parameter. We're calling increase level. As long as increase level is successful on that side. We then need to take our points, call the decrement. So you can type out increment, decrement, or you can just do the plus plus, negative, negative that we all love in C++. And our points spent, similarly, will then be incremented. And if I hit the key right next to plus plus, or rather I didn't hit shift, so I got the equals equals there. And lastly, not surprisingly, we'll call update tree. So this is when you're clicking on a button and assuming it gets to the end, then it's valid, it's been processed. If you wanted to add functionality in your player character, which, needed to update some stats or skills or whatever, this would be where you would call it. Lastly, our has prereqs function. So in here, we're going to get our prereqs. We're going to iterate through that loop. And this simple check will basically be, we'll get our buttons map. We're going to find based on the prereq ID. If we cannot find the button that has a prereq ID of another button in this array, then that's effectively means that we designed the tree wrong. We're going to return false here, but this would be a good place to put like a debug print. When it is found, then we need to get the level. And if that level is less than 1, then we're also going to just return false. This could also be equals to 2 or equals to 0, but just in case you have some other logic that can like remove levels, this might work out a little better. And then lastly, as long as it makes it through the entire array without returning, we return true. So with that all in place, we have our buttons. So this had a prerequisite set here. This has a prerequisite set here. This has prerequisites for both this and this. So, all right, so clicking on that did nothing. Let's see why that is. I'm wondering if this was just not set to valid. Let me just throw out some prints here. All right, so it was valid. So undo that. Button clicked is being called. Well, you can click on one of these, hit F9, and then when you run it, we'll stop here. So this is saying that that is true as expected. Hit F11, goes to the next one. Hit F11 again, it will go inside this function. So in here we find that we have our level of 0 and our max level. So we never set the max level for anything. So that's where the error lies. So we can set a default value here. And check in here. We'll take this breakpoint off. In our designer, are all our buttons automatically updated? Yeah, it looks like they are. So they all now have set value to 10. And we could, of course, edit that as needed. Let's try that again. All right, so I click that one. It adds a point to this. It adds a point to the point spent. Remove the one from the points available. This is not lit up because it also has a min rank check of 6. So once this gets up to 6, then this will be enabled. There we go. Similarly, this one requires this. So if I put in the 6 points here, we are now at 12, which is the minimum requirement for here, but of course, that was needed. And then lastly, you can see that this one only gets enabled when this has a point, and the other prerequisite has a point. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.